We set?
We're set.
All right. Yeah.
Just, next week you're, for Advent, you're in 200.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
You knew that ahead of time, so we're not-
That's the double room, right?
Yeah.
The,
one
yeah.
before, So we'll have the setup
Yeah.
all ready
Okay.
to go.
Yeah,
so
that sounds good. And I'll write to you because I'll continue this theme, but I want to do a little bit of a twist to connect it with some of the Advent texts. Like I'll mention the Isaiah text today, for example. So the theme will continue in terms of welcoming the stranger, but
Sure.
sort of placing
you,
it.
You just tell us when you want us to tweak it.
Okay.
We're good. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
He is a all-around pastor. He does it.
Let's go ahead and get started. Keep the riffraffs out of here, Alan. We will continue with this series, and I will try to incorporate the Advent text into the sort of the larger theme of welcoming the stranger, if you will. And I don't think we need to be sort of how should we say? We don't really need a groundwork to establish the idea that there were questions about welcoming the stranger in these Advent texts, and particularly the Old Testament ones that we will be looking at. Pastor Dave reminded me that we will be moving into, is it room 200 down the hall? I noticed that conspicuously absent from what he said, it had nothing to do with donuts. So that's on you to remind him of. You know, when you get displaced, right? It should come with some benefits, don't you think? We want to continue this. I'm struck again that the Old Testament text for this morning, I'll read you a section, and sometimes we're reminded how things change because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. This is one, some of you already know this, and so pardon me for saying this again, but I worked with the 8th century prophets in my PhD dissertation. And as you know, the text from this morning is one of those. It's a small section, but it's actually one of the texts that I explored. And what is interesting is that, which is worth reading again, and I'll give you two examples of how things change. It certainly, I'll read it again because it's such a magnificent text, and granted it's an excerpt of a much larger, obviously 8th century text from Amos. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills, and all nations shall stream to it. I mean, sometimes we read these texts Sometimes we hear these texts, and for most of us, even listen carefully to these texts. And what occasionally happens is that because of the familiarity, because it's Advent, because we've heard this before, the words sort of drift by, right? And yet we pause and realize, really? All nations shall stream to it? And the word that is often translated nations or peoples, occasionally Gentiles, right? In this context, you're either Jewish or Gentile, or even more sort of straightforwardly, you're either Jewish or you are not, right? Okay. Maybe there are not a lot of binary situations in our lives because our lives are filled with grays, but here's one. And we know the word Gentiles. We don't use it often, right? But we know it because we have so many of the words in the Romance languages that sound very similar, right? As in the Spanish for people is gente, right? You notice? Really, it might sound with an H sound, but it's the same word, as in G-E-N-T-E. That's the word. Or gens as in French. It's the same word, right? It means peoples or nations. It means that every nation, all of the peoples will flow. I mean, think about this. But also it reminds us that we are not even remotely close to that moment at all. And yet it's out there for us to be hopeful about. Not just optimistic. We're optimistic that what the forecast says that after 10 a.m. today, it will stop raining. We can figure that out. But hope is often predicated on something that we cannot see, but we believe. And we don't have a map for this. We don't have a timeline. We are a people that love timelines, right? We do. So many people will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths, for out of Zion shall come forth instruction." All of these words about instruction and teaching, it's referring to what? It's the same word, Torah. It's what it is, right? It's Torah. And the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And then we get to the second part of this remarkable short excerpt. He shall judge between the nations. So when we hear that, I mean, forget about all of the commentary that we could read about this text or ideas that, when you hear this, and it was read twice this morning, and so in case you're wondering, this is the third reading, okay? When you hear he shall judge between the nations, what comes to mind? Because we can't just let this go. If we let this go, we are listening to these words as if somehow it's, oh yeah, it's just, I could be reading anything from, the newspaper. We can't let this go. What does it mean that God will judge between the nations? I have an idea. And the idea is rooted in this word up here, which, by the way, I know doesn't make any sense to you, but bear with me. Okay. This root here, 3 letters, it's pronounced shafat or shofet, or depending on how it is conjugated. Okay, and it means to judge, and it's also the root of it's the root of the word that is the noun judge, the one who judges. But I put in parentheses here Because this letter, which is in Hebrew a mem, when you add that letter to the word, it's pronounced mishpat. Now, does that ring a bell? Yes, it rings a bell, right? And the reason it rings a bell, and I'm grateful for this because you have been attentive, right? And all of a sudden it comes to mind again, because we have talked about mishpat and tzedakah here again and again and again, and it shows up in really interesting ways. That's the root of the word. This just happens to be another way to sort of create a noun. I believe that the word is fundamentally relational. That the Lord will judge between nations, which presupposes, by the way, the only way this works is that nations are what? They are fundamentally in relationship, but at their moments when they are in conflict. So this is not, in my view, well, I want to hear your side of the story, and I want to hear your side of the story. I'll get back to you and decide who is. No, this is how do we bridge the fracture? How do we heal? I'm convinced in the ministry of Jesus, when the dust settles, when the stories are told, when the people complain, when all of the, the sort of the plans are made about, we have to get rid of when everything is settled, I think one could say that Jesus sets out to heal a broken world. And that comes with redemption, that comes obviously with healing, it comes with salvation. And think of the word salve, it has to do with what? Healing. And so we don't want to lose track of the idea that a great part of this has to do with healing among nations and among peoples. And so there will come a time, and we have to, of course we are reminded again and again, because of the times in which we live, that is not something simply to set aside. And yet it will not happen tomorrow. But we have to believe, if these texts are going to really matter to us, we have to believe that it will happen. Okay, one other quick thing, and then I'll give you an example out of this text. We know that the earliest gospel, from every indication, from every scholar, from everything that we know that the earliest gospel was the gospel of Mark, right? Forget about the sequence in the Bible. They're all over the place, okay? It's the gospel of Mark. When you read the gospel of Mark, and then you follow with the gospel of Matthew, which will be, by the way, again, the start of the new year here, Matthew, in the lectionary text, you will see that Matthew follows Mark very closely, but that also includes and expands. And then you read Luke and you see the same thing. And then you read John and there's nothing. Okay. But we also know that Mark's gospel came at a minimum one generation after the time of Jesus. And so we should be asking ourselves, why wait? Why wait to have the words, the healings, the teaching, the ministry of Jesus, for the most part, captured a generation later? Why not start writing?
Because they thought he was coming again.
Of course, because Jesus said,
He was coming back.
I'm coming back soon, right? And if we are told that Jesus is coming back soon, what's the first thing you're going to do? Get a piece of pencil and paper and says, I need to make some notes? No, right? We better get out and do what we need to do. And then, of course, Jesus did not come back in what we consider soon. And therein lies the challenge for us, right? because we frame the world in which we live based on how we imagine things are going to be. I'll see you in a few moments. A few hours later, you show up. Okay? I'll get back to you. By the way, one of the great lies in this universe, okay? Okay. Don't call me, I'll call you. The check is in the mail. You know these things, right? Yeah. I don't specify which mail. It could be in about 2,000 years, but yeah. So here is the thing about this, right? And Jesus, of course, is leaving a fractured world. And so it says here, there will come a time when they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. But people will walk in the light, which, by the way, we have to believe that currently people are walking in darkness, or else that statement makes no sense. And it is connected with what? War. In case you missed it. Right? It's war. Did you see the news? I think it came last night, which is when, tweets are made, 2 in the morning, about Venezuela, that people, airlines, American Airlines and others, should not be in that vicinity because something is about to happen. Okay? But things change. We have to let's be honest about it. One prophet who comes later reverses this, because actually it turns out that there's going to be a time of war, and so what do you need to do? Take all of your instruments of peace and turn it into war. So here's my example. I thought about this morning again. And this was in Scotland when I was doing my research. And we worshipped in a church there. It was not the Lutheran church. I mean, it's Scottish, right? It was an Episcopal church there. And it's silly for me to say it was an old Episcopal church. Everything is old, right, there. But this was an old, historic church. And every time I went there, I was struck by, there was kind of a stone fence around it. It's very low. It's all of maybe 2 feet, okay? And you walk through the stone gate, but on the fence, at sort of in spaces about 3 feet apart, there were about maybe 3 or 4 inches of a metal that jutted out of the stone. It's all around. And I was intrigued, and I finally asked. And I was told that actually it was a large, beautiful metal kind of decorative fence. And it was all cut down during the war to make weapons. Okay? So we have this stuff that goes on in cycles in a way. But in this we have a word that says, be hopeful. Be hopeful that in some time, in some place, maybe not in our lifetime, but set the ground rules, leave your footsteps, leave your mark for those who will come after us and carry it on. This is the work. And we've inherited this word 2,700, 3,000 years later now. And if ever there was a time, and I know maybe that's a statement that we might have heard over time, if ever there was a time. But here's the difference. It's our time. It's now our time. So when we hear these, as we will on Sunday again, and the following Sunday again, followed by the next Sunday, we will be reminded. So, all right. Let's go back to our friend Jonah, who, even though we don't want to accept this, is our man on the inside, if you will. Okay. This is not something we want to write home about, okay? But he is us. I'm not thrilled about it, but he is us. And a quick recap, God tells him to come, to get up, to arise and go. And of course, he does get up. But he has a different direction, right? He decides, no. Because, of course, these foreigners do not deserve to be saved. It's that straightforward. And Jonah, really, I mean, there are little bits and pieces in other prophets, but Jonah straightforwardly is the only prophet who is set aside to go and preach to the foreigners. Tell them about God's grace. Tell them about deliverance. But Jonah has decided, these Ninevites, they don't deserve it. And not only do they not deserve it, I'm not going. And, you know, like kids, right? Even though he was not a kid, kids would say what? You can't make me. Funny thing about that. And every parent here is thinking, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. And he runs away, and of course, you know what happens, right? Interestingly, the first act of the sailors is not to punish Jonah. Remarkably, it's to save him. They try everything, and he says, throw me overboard. And they said, no, we'll throw the cargo. Ultimately, he goes overboard. He is swallowed by a fish, right? And is in the belly of the fish for 3 days. I mean, right? In case you're wondering where the darkness is. He's in there. And then the Lord spoke. And we should be reminded, God is speaking, as we find in the New Testament, calming seas, right? And the wind, the whole works. This is a creation motif. All of creation here. Not just us human beings. And maybe this is a little bit of a kind of a humbling experience for us, that yes, we human beings can make choices and decisions and so on, but we are not the only part of creation. And in the belly of the big fish, Jonah has this, what practically every scholar who is interested in scholarship, and not everyone is, as you well know, books are written, and I weep for the trees that were cut down for those books. But this is a psalm. This is a psalm. And actually, it's a beautiful psalm. And if you take this psalm out of context, right, you would think, okay, this is the Jonah that I want to represent us. But it's focused on Jonah here. Let's be very clear. And it's very confessional. I call to the Lord out of my distress. It's my distress. And he answered me, out of the belly of Sheol I cried. Sheol, of course, typically is understood as the place of the dead, right? But here, clearly, is in the belly of the big fish, in a place of darkness. And you heard my voice. You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me, and all your waves and your billows passed over me. This is all about God as creator. Then I said, I'm driven away from your sight. How shall I look again upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me, and deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the root of the mountains. I don't know what he's talking about here, but, you know, when you're in the belly of a big fish and you're in darkness, you know, it's a time of deep introspection. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. As my life was ebbing away, I remember the Lord. and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who worship vain idols forsake their true loyalty. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. You've got to love Jonah at this moment. What I have vowed I will pay, deliverance belongs to the Lord. Then the Lord spoke to the fish, again, right? It's what we do in every day, right? And it vomited Jonah out on the dry land. It's a beautiful psalm. Confessional. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. Even though it doesn't say this in the text, there's a little bit of a footnote here. I think Jonah would say, deliverance belongs to the Lord. Look in the fine print, not for the foreigners though. Okay, it's a beautiful psalm. And many folks, Jonah being one among us, but many folks in our time, in our place, have a very difficult time believing in a God that has universal love, universal deliverance. How could this be? How could this be? And in fact, what we have is a reversal, if you will. Instead of the human beings created in what is known as the Imago Dei, we are created in the image of God, right? I believe mostly in terms of the character of God. Jonah and others believe that God, and many today, by the way, many today, believe that God was created in our image. And our image is very well defined. This is how we think, this is who we are, this is where we live, right? Politically and in other ways, ideologically, God has been created in our image. And sometimes, not us in this group, but let's be honest, sometimes we feel that if you don't like our image, do what? Go elsewhere. Go somewhere else. Because God has been created, we have created God in our own image. So Jonah knows everything, if you will, about the theology of a covenant relationship. He spells it out. He believes in this God. He believes that God could deliver you out of the place of death, if you will. God could deliver you out of darkness. He knows this. He says this, I know. But Jonah's world is absolutely defined. This is his world. This is not a world for you and for me as outsiders. And then God takes Jonah's word seriously. This is what you believe? Okay then. Come back into the world. Come out of darkness. Essentially, let's try this one more time. The word of the Lord, it says, I don't know that I will ever write a book with this title, but I've thought this is the title that I would love to write a book about, called The Yet of Grace. You know, we keep going in one direction, whether it's in a time of darkness, and then there's a moment, yet. And we see it in this psalm, yet. I was here, I was here, I was slipping away, I was in darkness, I was drifting away, I was in Sheol, yet. I often think yet can be a moment of grace for us. And there's a yet here. And Jonah makes a vow. Now, here's the thing, in my view, about vows. We know about vows, right? By the way, just in general, are vows good or bad? It depends. That's why I said in general, right? If I said in very particular. But we have people who make vows. Lord, if you will do this, right, I will never. Okay. And some vows God does not ask for. Jephthah, this is a story we'll talk about in the new year, when, of course, we want to talk about violence in January. Okay. Jephthah made a vow to God. It's totally unnecessary. Absolutely unnecessary. And it turned out, well, not well. Jonah makes a vow here, right? Making a vow is one thing. But if that vow is not meant for redemption and for healing and for goodness, and this here, Jonah says, I have vowed I will pay, deliverance belongs. But really, in other words, you repeat these words, but will you? He vowed, and let's see how that works out. So a second command comes from God. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. It's the same Hebrew word. The first time it says, arise, go. This time it says, get up. It's not as poetic. The same word. Get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I will tell you. So Jonah, pardon me, I want you to look carefully at the message. Jonah set out and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly large city. By the way, we have been told this repeatedly, right? That it's large, it's great, we're talking primarily geography here. A 3 days walk across. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's walk, and he cried out, 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown. All right, let's pause for a second. I'm going to ask you a somewhat subjective question. In your estimation, what makes for a good sermon? By the way, you might all be in the Gentile gallery next Sunday after your answers here today.
One that keeps you awake.
One that keeps you awake. Okay. So we begin with the bar that's very low. Okay. Meaningful? You know I'm going to ask the Socratic question. What does that mean, Alan? You cannot just get away, well, it's meaningful. What does that mean? No, I mean, what makes for a good sermon?
I think it's one that breaks through the barrier of your protective shell that says, I'm really a pretty good person. I'm okay.
And then you hear a sermon.
Then you hear the sermon and then you feel,
Whoops.
maybe I'm not okay. Maybe I am in need of some help.
Okay. And sometimes the great sermons leave us what?
With a lot of thought.
And also not feeling great, frankly. That doesn't mean it has to be that way, right? Maybe those are the moments when, to use that metaphor, which we will now destroy, right? It breaks into us to let a little bit of what? Light, okay? It makes us think. It reminds, it could do a variety of things, right? And believe me, I mean, in all seriousness, we hear great sermons here at Good Shepherd. We really do. Let me give you a sermon here. 40 days more, and Nineveh will be overthrown. I'll see you later. That's Jonah's sermon. In 40 days, by the way, you have to cut him some slack. He didn't say tomorrow, right? I'm going to give you 40 days, but of course we know 40, right? And it will be overthrown. What am I supposed to do? And he leaves. He leaves. I don't know how else to put it. This is a terrible sermon. Don't you want to sort of frame this a little bit? What's at stake here? In 40 days, you are going to be destroyed. And Jonah leaves. By the way, let's not get carried away here. If this text stopped right here, has Jonah really fulfilled what God has called him to do? No. No. And sometimes we get the idea that we do things not because of what has been told or outlined, but what? Despite what has been told. This is a despite moment, as we will discover, right? This is a despite moment. And actually, what I have to tell you, we have two instances in this text where groups of outsiders, groups of strangers, groups of foreigners are the ones who actually get it. The sailors, in the first instance, got it, when Jonah refused to get it. In the second instance, we will discover that the Ninevites got it. Starting with whom? The king. And make no mistake, there are exceptions, but often what happens at the helm has a way of shaping what happens after. And if you're wondering if you can think of a contemporary example, welcome to our situation in this country. It matters. It does, but it doesn't always have to be negative. So, and by the way, just for the record, I think you already know, Nineveh, at least in the geography of today, would be where? In Iraq, right? In Iraq. Which, by the way, as you may recall, 20 years ago, when things were being destroyed around there, one of the really great concerns among many in Iraq was the destruction of ancient artifacts, ancient stuff from biblical times. So, 40 days and more, Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh, I mean, that's the next sentence. The people of Nineveh believed God. Despite Jonah, they believed God. It doesn't say they believed Jonah here. They proclaimed a fast, and everyone, great and small, put on sackcloth. The last time we had this whole putting on sackcloth, you remember? Was in where? Remember Job? Yeah. Time of great distress, time of mourning, time of grief, right? He stripped himself bare, put on sackcloth, and his friends came and sat with him. Now, when the news reached, if I can get this here. David, I don't know what's going on here. But when the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. Now, okay, I think we got it. It's interesting. When God called Jonah, right, we have the whole reluctance built in here. He did rise, he did get up, but here, right, the message was delivered, and what does the king do? Same word. The king rose up. On hearing this word, the king rose up from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. This, at least in this story, is not a time to say, well, we'll show him. No. You begin with humility. That something needs to be done. That this may be the road to redemption. And humility, of course, means what? It's the same root that, when you're mowing and you leave the grass. What's it called? That blends into the ground? Hummus. It's the same root as humility, right? No one should run around saying, I'm number one in humility. No. It's where you are there. And what does the king do? Right? He strips away all of the regalia that sets him apart and becomes one with everyone, with the ground, with the lowest. And then he made a proclamation, the king's edict in Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his nobles. And listen to this proclamation. No human being or animal or herd or flock shall taste anything. They shall not feed, they shall not drink water. Humans and animals shall be covered with sackcloth, and they shall cry mightily to God, and all shall turn from their evil ways, from the violence that's in their hands. Boy, that's an edict. Imagine a leader. I want you to imagine now, because this is difficult. But I want you to imagine a leader who is able to say, I guess I do take responsibility here. I think I'm going to have a national time of fasting, a time of cleansing, a time of turning from what we're doing, a time from, imagine your leader saying, we need to change our ways from the violence of our hands. That's what the text says. By the way, this is not just what you're thinking, that's bad enough. We have to change from the violence of our hands. But it has to come from the leader. It cannot be, I take no responsibility. It has to come from the leader. And the king says, this is the way it's going to be. And when the king speaks, it happens. Again, as a reminder, when creation was outlined in Genesis, it was through what? The spoken word. Walter Brueggemann once said, the spoken word is an event. When you speak, something happens. Here, when the king speaks, you don't say, can we talk about this? No. You do it. You do it. And everyone And it gets a little weird because who else should be in sackcloth and not be drinking and eating? The animals. Now, we don't want to get tied up here and says, well, Hamchan, I mean, this is a little weird. But it's about creation. If something is going to change, all of creation has to change. And this, by the way, the bar is very high here. And this is the edict that comes from the king. Now, the king says, who knows? Let's do what we can do. Let's do what we need to do. Let's do what's within our hands to do. Now, sometimes it's not always easy, but let me connect. When it says, change from the evil in your hands, think back of that very same Isaiah that we heard from this morning, except in the first chapter. Isaiah says, you need to do a whole series of imperatives. Why? I will not listen to your prayers. I will not look at you, because famously, and it's a devastating indictment because of a phrase that says, because your hands are full of blood. And this is not a moment to say, oh, no, I think I'm good here. My hand, no. Your hands are full of blood. And this idea, therefore, is not something that is odd. It's what we do. In this case, it is what we do to those who we have deemed do not belong. And the king says, who knows? And then we get to some very challenging statements here, which I want for us to talk about. Here we go. When we think about Jonah, we think about the whale, right? There is no whale, right? And we think about being sort of, what I think is the King James Version doesn't say vomit, it says what? I love it. Spewed. Okay. That makes us feel all better. Okay. And then it says, God may relent and change God's mind. And so the question is it possible for God to change God's mind? Jeff goes with my kind of approach. Well, God does. Yeah, I'll go along with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Better have one heck of an argument.
What is interesting here, the argument comes in what form? Change. The argument does not come in some kind of intellectual debate. Change. What in Hebrew is called shuv, which is often translated repent. But the word literally means to turn around. It's a U-turn. That's the only way it works. So maybe God will relent and change his mind and turn. That's the word there. Shuv. Now, I don't want to complicate your lives and make you miss your, sort of lunch because you're thinking deep thoughts here. But shuv, often translated in the Old Testament as repent. It doesn't say repent here because, of course, the translators do not want to imply that God is repenting of something. Well, too bad. That's the word that is used here. Who knows, maybe God will turn away from his fierce anger that we do not perish. Here's the thing. If God is willing to turn around, not so can we or may we, but we must. We cannot continue to believe and to say that we are created in the image of God and we are walking in and not. Here is an invitation. Do it. When God saw what they did, that they turned from their evil ways, okay, that the word that is used there is the word actually sometimes translated wicked. God changed his mind. By the way, there is no footnote here that says, wink, wink, maybe. God changed his mind about the calamity. And I have to say I love this. Calamity. It's the same Hebrew word that means wickedness or evil. But we can't translate the word when it refers to God. So what do we say? It's very nice. I will change my mind because I don't want to bring about the calamity. But in the Hebrew, it's the word that means wickedness or evil. And maybe it is not to say that God is evil, it is to say that what would happen to the Ninevites unless they clean up their act, right? Is going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. They'll be wiped out. And God decides that God will not do that. God changed God's mind. It's in the text. And he did not do it. God did not do it. If you're looking in the lexicon, you may find many examples of salvation. And when you hear that destruction is about to come onto you as an individual, as a community, as a people, and you are spared from that destruction because we have turned around, led by a king or a leader, that's salvation. We have been saved in this world. But this was very displeasing to Jonah. I'm sorry, I know this gets stuck here. Sorry, David. But this was very displeasing to Jonah. I mean, and by the way, what Jonah says after this is, I don't know if you want to say it's hilarious or sad, but someplace in there. Jonah was not happy. And in fact, the text says he became angry. Right? He became angry. He cannot stand the idea that salvation and redemption and mercy and grace could be given to the Ninevites. Why should they have it? Because these magnificent qualities that define who God is should belong to whom? Us. He can't stand it. And we have, by the way, I'm not saying this question here should be sort of laminated in our studies or offices at home. But what I'm saying is that this question should be laminated in our studies and offices at home. Okay, who deserves grace?
We all do.
And who should have the, to use the Yiddish word, the chutzpah, to determine I will decide who deserves God's grace. And he prayed to the Lord and said, I mean, this, by the way, Jonah is relentless here. He's not just saying, well, you know what? Lord, this is on you. I've done my job. I preached the worst sermon there is, and the people obviously have heard you, but I'm done, I'm gone. But Jonah is relentless. He's complaining to God right now. Is not this what I said while I was still in my country? Why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning? I knew. This is Jonah. I knew you were a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from punishment. So Jonah knows. Jonah does not just discover, wow, I didn't realize that, this is really, thank you very much. No, he knows this. And because he knows this, he decides that I'm going to run away. And Jonah says, this is exactly why I did not want to go to Nineveh. I knew, Lord, you would pull a stunt like this. As if somehow grace is finite. And you cannot just go around giving away grace to these foreigners. I'm not happy about it. He says, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that one of the things that we probably do not want to do in our lives is to make statements like that and then have God question us. It almost never ends well, okay, for us. And now, oh Lord, by the way, please take my life from me. It's better for me to die than to live. I cannot stand all this grace to these outsiders. Let me die. And I would love in one of these stories where it comes back, you know what, good idea. Yeah. It doesn't, but I would rather die. By the way, even our friend Job once said, I wish I was not born to have to go through this. But Jonah is so incensed that he would rather die than to have God's grace be given to the outsiders. Take my life. And the Lord said, is it right for you to be angry? Essentially, why are you angry? Why are you angry? Why can't I be kind and caring and compassionate and loving and be gracious to another person who is not like us? Why can't I be? Why, Jonah? Why? There's no answer yet. But Jonah went out of the city, sat down, and east of the city, that little reference east of the city reminds you of what? Maybe, sort of, at least for me. It reminds me of east of Eden, right? Right? You go out there, you can still live, but you go east of the city, sat down, you made a booth for himself, he sat under it in the shade, and he waited to see what would become of the city. Jonah is so relentless that despite what God said, Jonah wants to see for himself if in fact Nineveh is going to be destroyed. Not whether they're going to be saved. He wants to see for himself. It's kind of like, I'm going to build a little tent. I have a backpack. I have my popcorn. And I'm going to wait to see what's going to happen with Nineveh. Quickly here. Okay. He's still hoping. And then the Lord appointed a bush and made it come over Jonah to give shade over his head. Quickly. To save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was very happy. As long as God provided for Jonah, what? He was happy. I mean, he got shade, right? But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm and attacked the bush, so it withered. When the sun rose, God prepared a sultry east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint and asked that he might die. You know, this is like 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. You know, it's not, you're not even asking for just let me die. You know, it's too hot here. It is better for me to die than to live. And you know, Jonah, be careful what you ask for. God doesn't say that. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the bush? By the way, it's a rhetorical question. Don't answer, Jonah. You're already in a hole. But he, you know, sometimes, right, you can't help yourself. Thankfully, we don't have anyone in our society who can't help himself. Leaders. Kings, president. Yes, angry enough to die. I'm so angry, I could just die. And the Lord said, you are concerned about the bush for which you did not labor and you did not grow, and it came into being a night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals? That's the question. And this story ends on a question. Are you telling me that I should not care for these foreigners? And by the way, before you're thinking of answering, don't. I asked you 3 rhetorical questions and you can't help yourself with one of them. Don't. The answer here is inherent. I will save the city and its people. And grace and steadfast love will be meted out to them in a way that it is the case for all of God's people. It's a very, very hopeful message, and it's also a painful message, because we live in a time where this has become, for many, a casualty. And the text with this last question reminds us that we cannot afford to have it become a casualty. The grace that God, the steadfast love of God, the mercy of God will be available for all of God's creation. All right, let's stop there. We will continue next time, with or without donuts.